What's destroying your life isn't what happens on the outside. It's what your mind keeps repeating on the inside every single day in silence. And Thoth warned about this thousands of years ago. But no one listened. Or better yet, no one was allowed to listen. You're about to understand why. For here, the most forbidden secret about the human mind will be revealed. The secret that the Hermetic schools hid, that the initiates feared, and that Thoth recorded for those who had eyes to see. If you can get sick from a thought, you can also heal with a thought. But only if you can do something that almost no one in this world does. And that's why most people suffer, get sick, repeat the same cycles, and don't even realize they're trapped in a prison built by their own thoughts. That trap has a name, and the secret to breaking it is hidden in Thoth's most dangerous words. Listen up. In the next few minutes, you'll receive codes that immediately shift your vibrational field. And by the end, you'll understand the exact point where your mind stops being your enemy and becomes your healing. But until then, you need to go through each veil, because only those who make it to the end awaken. So if you feel like there's something wrong in your field, in your body, in your emotions, if you feel like you're being sabotaged by something you can't even explain, do not retreat. For the key is already here and the door is about to open. A mind not guided by the noose becomes mad and sick. But when the noose commands, the mind becomes healthy and heals the body. For everything the mind heals, the spirit seals. You can smile on the outside, say everything's fine, pretend that nothing affects you. But if your mind is filled with fear, unresolved anger, repetitive thoughts of failure, injustice, and pain, your body will receive that command and it will obey. Hermeticism has always warned, everything that exists in the physical plane was first a vibration, a shape, a field, a pattern. This is the law of correspondence. What is above is like what is below. What is within is like what is without. What does this mean in practice? That if you feed dense, self-destructive thoughts or ones filled with resentment, sooner or later that will manifest first in the emotional field, then in the energetic field, and finally in the body. Nowadays, this phenomenon is known as psychosomatics, but the ancients knew this long before modern science. Thoth said that the body was the temple of the spirit and that every illness was above all a rupture between the mental and the divine. When that connection breaks, the body begins to absorb psychic residue like soil poisoned by the very source that was meant to nourish it. And this doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, silent process. You feel some tension in your back here, some insomnia there, constant nausea, skin irritation, and you blame stress, traffic, the weather, food. But the root is something else. It's in the way you've been thinking, or better, in how you've been letting your mind repeat the same circuits every day without interruption. Repetitive thought patterns aren't just abstract ideas, they're real vibrational fields. And these fields start to soak into your system like smoke darkening the walls of a house. At first, it's barely noticeable. But after a while, everything begins to darken. And if you don't stop, the air gets heavy. The ceiling starts to crack. The foundation begins to give way. And suddenly you're sick, exhausted, out of energy without knowing why. But now you know. Your body is just following the script your mind wrote. And if you're writing every day that the world is dangerous, that you don't deserve love, that your life is a failure, that your destiny is to suffer, the body records all that as truth and starts reacting accordingly. It creates symptoms, it gets sick because it's trying to warn you that something is out of alignment. And the cruelest part is that most people, when they feel the symptoms, try to fight them with medication, with distractions, with denial. But they don't go to the root. They don't return to the original field where it all began. What field is that? The mind. And not just any mind, but the unconscious mind, automated, intoxicated by a constant flow of thoughts that no longer serve you. That's why even after treatments, surgeries, therapies, and diets, many people remain sick because the body tries to recover. But the mind keeps sending the same commands, and no cell can survive under a vibrational order that says, "You're not enough, you're in danger, you're worthless." The body sacrifices itself for the mind. And if you don't change that command from the top down, it will keep getting sick because it's loyal, it's obedient, and it was made to serve you, but not to carry forever the pains your mind refuses to release. Now you understand that the obedience of the body is not punishment. It's reflection, it's correspondence. And once you understand that, you can no longer ignore the power your thoughts have over every cell, every organ, every beat of your heart. But when that mental command stays distorted for too long, there comes a point when trying to heal with positive thinking doesn't work anymore because the mind that caused the damage has already lost the strength to reverse it. When overthinking can destroy you, you start to believe you can fix everything just by thinking differently. But what actually happens is that you dive even deeper into a cycle of rumination, a loop of expectations, frustrations, and desperate attempts at self-control. At this point, the mind is no longer just out of balance. It begins to implode, trying to fix what it itself broke. It becomes your only point of reference. And when all you have as a foundation is a mind that's exhausted, disconnected from the soul, from awareness, and from the body, it collapses. Alchemy called this process putrefaction, the stage where the old substance rots so that something new can be born. But when this putrefaction happens on the mental plane and there's no awareness to observe the process, what should have been a transmutation turns into self-destruction. It's like you're inside a house on fire, and instead of getting out, you start looking for explanations for the fire, trying to figure out who lit the match, in which room it started, how hot it is, while everything around you collapses. That's what the mind does when it enters collapse. It tries to control the uncontrollable, rationalize what cannot be rationalized, resist the inevitable. The mind in this state no longer seeks healing. It seeks survival within the pain. Because pain has become the only known territory. And everything that's familiar, no matter how destructive, gives the mind a false sense of safety. But that safety comes with a price, and the price is high. Because thinking too much without direction, without alignment, without breath can lead you to a state where the body starts to give in, and your life energy begins to fade. You don't notice this overnight, but over time, exhaustion becomes normal. Discouragement becomes part of your routine, emotional numbness, disinterest in things, disconnection from the present moment. All of that starts to feel like just a phase. But it's not just a phase, it's a progressive collapse. It's the result of a mind that wasn't heard in time. A mind that became the center of your existence but wasn't designed for that. According to Thoth, the true purpose of the mind is to serve the inner light, to channel higher intelligence into matter. He said, "You shall separate the subtle from the dense with great patience and wisdom." In other words, the mind should be a bridge between the invisible and the visible, between the spirit and the body. But when it disconnects from the source, it stops serving the sacred and starts serving only itself. And that inevitably leads to collapse. You start thinking about everything all the time without stopping. You analyze, compare, anticipate, revisit, plan. Your mind creates 1,000 possibilities per minute, but none of them bring relief. None of them soothe because none are connected to the now. None are rooted in presence. They're all floating in fear, in control, in the anxiety of solving something that could only be dissolved with silence. But in that state, silence feels like a threat. The inner void is frightening. The pause is uncomfortable because the mind has created such a noisy universe inside you that any attempt to quiet it is interpreted as danger. And that creates a paradox. You want to heal, but you fear the silence that could heal you. This is the most delicate moment because if nothing is done here, you could end up thinking yourself out of existence. Not physically, but vibrationally. You start to disappear from yourself, start living on autopilot, start losing the ability to feel, to care, to recognize yourself. And that's why the risk is real. But even at this advanced stage of collapse, there's still a gap. There's a crack, a vibrational opening where reversal is still possible. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it exists. And if you recognize it in time, it can be the beginning of a new path. This crack, this delicate point between collapse and recovery is where everything can start to change. But here, there's no room for spiritual pride or false certainties. Here, the only way forward is to recognize that you'll need everything you can access: thought, awareness, medicine, food, body, energy, silence, and presence. Because real healing, when the damage has already manifested in the body, doesn't happen with a single key. It requires a union of many forces, a set of energies working together. The mistake many people make at this point is thinking that one path is enough, as if there were a miraculous cure in a single thought, a single technique, or a single medication. But the truth is that the imbalance was built in many layers, and so the restoration needs to reach all those levels at once. Thoth taught that everything that is dual, everything that's fragmented, everything that's out of alignment must be reconciled in the fire of the One. And that fire is awakened consciousness, the consciousness that doesn't reject pain but also doesn't cling to it, the consciousness that doesn't deny physical treatment but also doesn't idolize it as the only solution. The consciousness that understands matter, energy, and spirit are all part of the same organism. That's why real healing cannot be reductionist. It's not about taking a pill and ignoring the anger you've held onto for 20 years, nor about repeating positive affirmations while your body is begging for rest and nourishment. And it's also not about relying only on medicine and forgetting that your mental field is sending out commands 24 hours a day. Healing at this stage is integration, it's inclusion, it's alchemy. And in true alchemy, everything can be used as a transforming agent. The mistake, the trauma, the pain, the illness, the medicine, the word, the silence, the tear, the touch, the food, the breath. Everything can serve transmutation when it's in service of consciousness. Nothing is discarded, nothing is denied. Everything is seen, recognized, and reorganized. This is the moment when the ego suffers most because it wants to fix everything on its own. It wants a quick answer, an infallible formula, a secret technique that brings instant relief. But Thoth was clear. The ego that tries to control the soul's process only delays healing. Because the ego operates in separation and healing happens in unity. That's why many times before things get better, you feel like everything got worse because the disconnected parts of you start to emerge. The memories hidden beneath the rational mind rise to the surface. The body begins to release what was accumulated over years. And if you're not aware of this process, you might think you're failing, but you're not. You're rediscovering, defragmenting, reintegrating. But that takes courage because facing everything you've tried to hide your whole life is challenging. There is no real healing without that internal exposure, without that humility to recognize that maybe you lived for a long time believing you could handle it all alone. That you could ignore the body, that you could silence the soul, that you could numb yourself with positive thinking while everything inside was screaming for truth. But now the moment has come to change that. And for that change to happen, for this reintegration process to begin, something must stop immediately. A cycle, a behavior, an invisible pattern that operates inside almost everyone without being noticed. And if it's not interrupted now, it will keep sabotaging every attempt at healing, growth, and freedom. The thought that almost always leads to the end. This invisible pattern, which keeps running without being noticed, has a name: self-betrayal. And it doesn't happen through big gestures. It happens in silence, behind the scenes of your own thoughts. When you feel something true but ignore it. When a clear intuition arises but you rationalize it until it's suffocated. When your body asks for a break but you say you don't have time. Little by little you begin to wound something inside yourself that can't fight back. That quiet part is your nous as described in Hermeticism. It's the divine spark, the purest consciousness that lives within you. It doesn't speak loudly nor use logical arguments. It simply vibrates. It just radiates truth. But when you let your thoughts spread without awareness, taking up all the space, it starts to get buried until the point where you can no longer feel it. You no longer know what you really want. You don't even remember what it feels like to be at peace. The cruelest act is not getting sick, nor is it failing. The cruelest act is suffocating that part of you that was born to shine, to guide, to keep your soul alive as you walk through this earthly experience. But instead of protecting it, you corner it with fears, doubts, and mental patterns that no longer serve. And worse, you normalize this suffocation as if it were part of adult life, of the real world, of the fast-paced routine. But it's not normal. It never was. This kind of silent torture is what causes spiritual collapse. Because when the mind takes the soul's throne, as warned in the Corpus Hermeticum, everything falls out of balance. The body resists but starts to fail. Emotions fluctuate but lose their brilliance. The senses get scrambled and life becomes a gray hallway where you just repeat learned gestures without presence. And the most painful part is that this divine part living inside you cannot run away. It cannot defend itself or disappear. It just waits. Waits for you to stop, for you to listen, for you to remember because it is patient. But the more you ignore its presence, the more it withdraws, and the more the mind fills the void with control, anxiety, distraction. This is when suffering starts turning into despair. Because even surrounded by techniques, books, information, you feel that something is missing. And something really is. What's missing is you remembering who you are. What's missing is making space for the nous to breathe again, for the soul to guide the process again, for the spirit to take back control of the ship. This is the true mistake, not failing in spiritual practice or in diet or in life choices. The most painful mistake is abandoning this inner being that was always there, waiting for a gesture of reconnection. No matter how small, a conscious silence would already be enough. A moment of truth would already be a crack of healing. But when you deny this for too long, something dark begins to appear. A subtle thought, almost imperceptible, but one that changes everything. Because it doesn't come from the soul. It comes from the collapse between mind and spirit. And its origin reveals a new layer of the abyss. This dark thought, which creeps in quietly when the noose is suffocated, doesn't come as a scream. It comes as a whisper. What if all of this just ended right now? It doesn't appear as an evil idea. It comes as an escape, a desperate attempt by the mind to flee from a collapse it doesn't know how to hold because there is a limit. And when the body has already given in, the soul has faded, and the thoughts won't stop spinning in circles, the mind switches into survival mode. And in this mode, it starts to consider the unthinkable, not out of malice, but because it wants to shut the system down. It wants to stop the pain, end the cycle. In spiritual alchemy, this moment is called Nigredo, the Black Death, a deep stage in the initiatory process. It's when everything goes dark, when the being dissolves, when all points of reference vanish, when nothing seems to make sense anymore. The old no longer serves, the new hasn't arrived, and the self in the middle of it floats as if being pulled inward. But this death doesn't have to be literal. And this is where the key is revealed, because every true alchemical process goes through this moment, the point of dissolution. But the initiate, the one who knows the ways of the soul, does not despair here. They understand. They feel the despair, yes, but they recognize this is part of it. This is the rock bottom needed for the new to begin to take shape. And that's why many awakened people have gone through this dark thought, some more than once. And it's not shame. It's not weakness. It's the crossing, the symbolic death, the implosion of the old self, the collapse of illusions, the moment when the spirit begins to draw near to reverse the story. But that approach doesn't come through logic. The soul doesn't come with arguments. It comes with silence. And the only way to hear that silence in the middle of chaos is to stop fighting the pain and begin to listen to it. Because pain has a function. It's a code, a spiritual alarm, a vibrational password that only the initiated learn to decode. And this is the most delicate point because the dark thought only dissolves when you understand the message behind it. When you understand that it's not the end, it's a portal, a marker, a point of no return, but not toward destruction, toward transition, toward transmutation. What will die is not you. It's what was never really you. It's the shell. It's the mask. It's the mental program that held you prisoner for too long. If you can make it through this dark night without identifying with it, something inside begins to open. The inner pressure turns into strength. The collapse becomes revelation. And the pain, which once felt unbearable, becomes a calling, a code, a sacred signal. Because pain, when heard with an awakened heart, is no longer a punishment. It's an invitation. And only the initiated can recognize when that invitation appears, and that changes everything. This is the most forbidden secret. The mind can heal. But only when it stops functioning as a common mind and begins to operate as an extension of the One. Thoth said that thought guided by light shapes the flesh. This means that thought, when purified, is no longer a reaction. It becomes a command. It vibrates at the frequency of the origin. It directly touches the field that organizes reality. But here's the point. It's not about thinking positively. It's not about repeating phrases. It's about commanding reality from a state that can only be reached after symbolic death. After the ego collapses, after the noose, the spark returns to the throne. And this kind of thought is rare. It is silent. It is direct. It carries no doubt, no rush, no anxiety. It doesn't ask. It emits. And when that happens, the body begins to reorganize. Reality begins to respond. Chaos loses power. The field comes into alignment. But that's only possible when the thought is born from the right place. The place where you stopped fighting, stopped running, stopped distracting yourself. And this is where the greatest obstacle appears. The invisible behavior that paralyzes everything. Escape. Because even those who seek healing are often still running. Running from pain, running from silence, running from themselves. And this escape comes in disguise. It shows up as an overload of information, books, messages, tasks, entertainment. All of it seems normal. But in truth, it is the greatest poison to the vibrational field because distraction weakens focus. And focus is the channel of healing. Thoth taught that the inner void is the portal, not a depressed void, but an awakened void, the pause, the stillness, the soul's listening. And the modern world knows this. That's why it offers 1,000 ways to fill your time, 1,000 ways to keep you from going inward. Because if you go in, the system loses and healing begins. But for it to take root, firmness is required. It's not about brute force. It's about stopping, looking, listening, and staying. Even when it seems like nothing is happening. Because it's in that space where the external stops that the internal begins to respond. And when that happens, something around you changes, something you don't control. You no longer need to protect yourself from life because life stops being a threat. The vibration shifts. The body is still the same. The problems might not have disappeared, but the field no longer responds the way it used to. Fear doesn't get triggered. The internal noise calms down. The world remains the same, but your lens has changed, and that changes everything. This is the beginning of true regeneration. Because when the inner eye awakens, it doesn't see the world as it is. It sees the world as it vibrates. And the world, when observed with beauty, begins to reorganize around that new frequency, not by magic, but by resonance. You start to notice signs, synchronicities, small openings where there were only blocks before. Situations that once seemed locked begin to shift. The chaos around you slows down. And not because it disappeared, but because your vibration stopped feeding it. At this point, the field begins to respond, not by force, but by alignment. You no longer try to force healing. You become the field where healing happens. And that's when everything flips. The mind, which once was the enemy, becomes an ally. It's no longer a prison, it becomes a tool. It no longer drains energy, it distributes it. You begin to remember your origin, that the mind was made to serve, not to rule. And in that moment, without even realizing it, you reclaim the throne of inner creation. And now you can see clearly. You were always in command. But you had forgotten, and there's no blame in that. Forgetting is part of it. Mistakes are part of it. Pain is part of it. All of it are steps that prepare you to return to your center. This is the moment the initiate understands. It's not about destroying the mind. It's about consecrating it, educating it, redirecting it, and from that, healing. Thoth said, "The man who rules the mind rules the gods." Because when the mind serves the spirit, it becomes a bridge, it becomes a channel, it becomes a creative verb. And you weren't born to live intoxicated by thoughts. You were born to govern them. You were born to access the vibration that organizes reality and turn it into medicine. If thought was capable of making you sick, then the same thought at the right frequency can heal you. And this is where the choice becomes clear. Either you keep feeding the poison or you start emitting the antidote. This is the return to the throne, not a throne of ego, but the silent throne of awakened consciousness, the one that doesn't rule by force but by coherence. And when that happens, life begins to respond.